Lindsey Burke of the Heritage Foundation to talk about national education standards. Welcome, Lindsey. Are you there?
I am.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the show, Lindsey.
Thank you.
So I believe Heritage held a conference earlier today on this national standards issue. What can you tell us about the discussion that took place there?
We did, and it was a great conference, and this really examined the Obama administration's push to nationalize the content that is taught in every local public school across America. And the administration has been pushing this effort for the past year and a half or so, using significant amounts of federal dollars to incentivize states, federal dollars that were carved out of the so-called stimulus, by the way, to incentivize states to adopt Common Core national standards. And if they are successful, this will be probably the most significant federal education overreach we've ever seen, and would really further remove parents from the educational decision-making process.
Now, the Obama administration discusses, says these are voluntary standards. Lindsey, no one's being forced to do anything. States can take it or leave it. Why don't you see it that way?
Well, I wish that were the case, but unfortunately what we've seen is the Obama administration use $4.35 billion in Race to the Top money to incentivize states to adopt. And now we see the administration offering what they're calling No Child Left Behind waivers to states. But of course, these waivers come with significant federal strings attached. And one of the major strings is that states adopt national standards in order to have access to these waivers. So this is a big executive overreach, and they have been using both this carrot and stick approach to incentivize states to adopt.
Now, my understanding is more than 40 states, maybe something like 45 states have already adopted the standards. Has this battle been lost, or are states rethinking this at this point?
Not at all, and you're right, 45 states have adopted so far, but there are a lot of conservative state leaders that are starting to have some second thoughts about ceding control over their standard-setting authority to distant national organizations and to bureaucrats in Washington. And I think one of the reasons they're starting to have some pause is because now we're starting to see the price tag come out. And even though the Obama administration used $4 billion to incentivize states to adopt, we now know that the cost to implement these standards is 4 times that amount. The Pioneer Institute released a report that suggests that it will cost states $16 billion to adopt these standards. And so state taxpayers will be on the hook for that. So I think a lot of state leaders are starting to rethink this, both from a philosophical perspective and from a pragmatic cost perspective as well. I don't think there's any state right now that's in a position to spend billions of dollars in additional money to cede their standard setting to Washington bureaucrats, nor should they.
Well, let's talk about the substance of the arguments that proponents of national standards make, aside from these 10th Amendment concerns and aside from the cost and so forth. They point to our international competitors, for example, and they point to Americans' performance on international tests and how poorly we do against countries that have national standards themselves. They also point to what we had under No Child Left Behind and before then, which is states setting their own standards, and that sometimes these standards were essentially meaningless, how the states would set standards that at a very low bar so that more children would do better, and they could say they had high passage rates and so forth, and we need to avoid that. How do you address those concerns without national standards?
Well, part of the reason we saw states watering down those standards was because of federal overreach in the first place, because of No Child Left Behind, which levied sanctions onto states if they weren't able to get 100% of students to be proficient. And so we did start to see states water down their standards. But the reason we saw that was because of federal overreach in the first place through laws like No Child Left Behind. On the international competitive piece, sure, there are many countries that outperform us that have national standards, but there are just as many countries that the United States outperforms that don't have national standards, that do have national standards as well. So I think that's a little bit of a misguided argument to make. And the other point I would make on this is there are proponents that say, well, math, for instance, is the same in every state.
Right.
But I would argue, and Representative Rob Bishop made this case at Heritage recently, that certainly math is the same in every state, but children aren't. And so states need to be able to improve their own state standards, and certainly handing over control of that to Washington is not the answer.
Where does the No Child Left Behind renewal stand at this point? Because, as you mentioned earlier, referenced earlier, a part of this process of imposing national standards has involved issuing waivers to states, No Child Left Behind waivers, if they adopt some of these proposals that the administration favors. Where does that debate stand right now over renewing No Child Left Behind?
Well, for the past year and a half, Congress has been working through a pretty thoughtful process about what the future of No Child Left Behind should be, and if it should even have a future at all. There are about 5 proposals that have come out of the House Education and the Workforce Committee that would significantly reduce the federal role. There are proposals that have been put forward in the Senate, and then there are conservative alternatives like A+ that would allow states to completely opt out of No Child Left Behind. So Congress has been working through a very thoughtful process about what to do with the law. And then the Obama administration decides to step in and completely circumvent Congress and tell Congress effectively, sorry, your time's up. We're just going to start issuing waivers to states that agree to our preferred policies. So right now we're at a very interesting point where the Obama administration is effectively trying to rewrite No Child Left Behind from the White House. And this is a big overreach, and I think states should reject these waivers. They should reject national standards as well, and allow this congressional process to play out as it should.